Echoes call from hollow halls, a voice that creeps and softly crawls. Time stands still, the air is.
It was September 15th, 2025, when a quiet Arizona prison morning turned into a moment the state could never forget. At 9:35 a.m., an officer walked a routine hallway. He's grabbed, slammed, punched, kicked, and when he finally breaks free, the nightmare only gets worse. Backup doesn't arrive. No one hears his calls. The officer monitoring the cameras has no working radio. And for nearly 2 minutes, this man is left completely alone while his attackers pause to rest, then come back to finish what they started. But that's not the only disturbing case. Today, we will be talking about the most disturbing videos caught on camera. On the morning of 31st October 2018, the passengers on a city bus crossing the Yangtze River Bridge were thinking about their day, not danger. The bus moved smoothly through Chongqing, sunlight reflecting on the water below, and everything felt routine. No one could have guessed that within minutes, an ordinary ride would turn into a tragedy that would shake the entire country. A woman sitting toward the middle of the bus realized she had missed her stop. Annoyed and embarrassed, she walked quickly toward the front, asking the driver to let her off immediately. The driver, focused on the road and the bridge ahead, gently explained that he could not stop on the bridge because it would be unsafe. He promised to let her off at the next proper stop. Instead of calming the situation, his response seemed to ignite her frustration. Passengers nearby noticed her voice rising and her gestures becoming sharper. The argument intensified in seconds. The woman lifted her mobile phone and struck the driver with it. Shocked and reacting on instinct, the driver swung his arm back. With both of them distracted, the steering wheel jerked. The bus swerved violently, and the passengers felt the sudden shift as panic rippled through the aisles. At approximately 10 minutes and 2 seconds in the morning, the bus crossed into the opposite lane, crashed through the bridge's barrier, and plunged toward the river. The impact with the water was immediate and overwhelming. Witnesses standing along the riverbank said the bus disappeared beneath the surface almost instantly, leaving only bubbles and widening ripples behind. Rescuers arrived as fast as they could. Divers entered the cold river while a massive crane waited overhead to lift the wreckage once it was located. For days, teams searched tirelessly. 13 victims were eventually recovered, but 2 people remained missing, leaving their families to hold on to fading hope beside the river's edge. As the country tried to make sense of what had happened, investigators pulled together recordings from the bus's black box, nearby surveillance cameras, and witness testimonies. Piece by piece, they reconstructed the final moments. What they found confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The disagreement, the distraction, and the sudden fight had caused the crash. Neither person involved had intended harm, but their actions created a chain reaction that no one could reverse. Legal experts later explained that both individuals had violated public safety laws, and the families of the victims could seek damages. Others pointed out that the incident showed how important it is for safety rules on public transport to be followed without exception. One lawyer called the case one of the most severe examples he had ever seen, a moment where emotion overpowered responsibility. Across China, the tragedy became more than a headline. It became a sobering reminder of how quickly a small argument can grow into something irreversible. A reminder that patience, calm choices, and respect for safety are not just polite habits. Sometimes they are what keep an ordinary day from becoming a devastating loss. Before we go any further, I just want to ask you for a small favor. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We are pushing to hit 200,000 subscribers before the year ends. It feels impossible, but I know we can achieve it together because your support has been unreal. I know you'll subscribe, so without wasting more time, let's get back to the video. On what should have been a simple, forgettable morning, a man stepped outside his home to borrow a chair from his neighbor. It was the kind of errand people run without thinking, the kind of moment that usually blends into the background of a calm day. He grabbed the chair, turned around, and began walking back toward his car, already mentally moving on to whatever he planned next. But as he passed the neighbor's yard, something subtle but unsettling made him stop in his tracks. The gate, normally shut, normally secure, was open, and through that open space stood a pit bull, planted firmly in place, staring at him with a stillness that felt unnaturally intense. No friendly wagging, no curious sniffing, just a fixed stare that said the dog was on full alert. In an instant, the morning shifted from peaceful to unpredictable. Before he could retreat, the dog charged. Adrenaline took over. The only thing in his hands was the chair. But in that moment, it became his shield. He lifted it reflexively, trying to create space while moving backward, gently guiding the dog away from him without escalating the situation. But before he could gain control, a second dog squeezed through the gap in the gate. This one was smaller, but just as determined, doubling the tension and cutting off his escape route. He tried to maneuver, planting his feet firmly, but the ground betrayed him. He slipped, and that small misstep changed everything. The larger dog reached him first, and suddenly the two were rolling across the grass in a chaotic struggle. The world narrowed down to instinct, breath, and movement. The dog pushed. He pushed back. It was not a fight he wanted, but one he had no choice but to survive. Then something remarkable happened. Through the fear and the scramble, he found a grip, an angle he remembered from watching self-defense demonstrations online. He shifted his body, wrapped his arms around the dog, and held it firmly across the upper body, keeping it from overpowering him. It was not aggression, it was pure survival. A man trying to protect himself while also trying not to harm the animal. Each second felt long and heavy. He breathed through the panic, adjusted his hold, and steadied himself against the ground. Slowly, incredibly, he gained enough control to stand again, dragging the dog with him while gently pushing the second dog away with his leg. The scene looked unreal. A man who had stepped outside for a chair, now fighting to stay on his feet against two determined animals. Step by step, he edged toward the open gate. But just when safety seemed within reach, the larger dog slipped from his hold. Before he could react, it lunged forward and clamped onto his leg. Pain shot through him, but even then, he refused to panic. Instead, he reached down, took hold of the dog near its collar area, and steadied himself once more. Through sheer calm and determination, he regained control. With no neighbors in sight and no one rushing to help, he made a decision. He lifted the dog despite the pain, despite the weight, and carried it back into the yard. In the moment, the pool area seemed like the safest place to contain it without causing harm. So he guided the dog there and moved quickly back to the gate. The instant the gate shut, the world finally quieted. The shaking in his arms, the throbbing in his leg, the rapid beat of his heart, all of it suddenly caught up with him. He limped to his car, sat down, and breathed deeply, finally processing everything that had happened in those intense minutes. Later, when local reporters asked him about the ordeal, he spoke calmly. He emphasized that he did not blame the dogs, and hoped the owners would secure their gate to prevent another scare. The neighborhood buzzed with the story for days. Parents checked their fences, pet owners double-locked their gates, and everyone marveled at how a regular man found the courage, composure, and clarity to handle a frightening situation without letting it escalate into something far worse. By the evening, the borrowed chair sat quietly near his home. The dogs were safe behind their gate, and the man scraped, sore but steady, walked back inside, now carrying a story that would be hard for anyone to forget. On what began as a calm, ordinary morning in Katy, the kind of morning where neighbors wave as they pull out of their driveways, and the air still smells like early sunshine, 83-year-old Dennis McKee stepped outside his home expecting nothing unusual. It was around 8:30 in the morning on the 31st day of October 2023. He noticed two dogs wandering near his yard. They looked lost, thirsty, maybe even friendly. Nothing about them hinted at danger. Surveillance footage later showed Dennis doing what many kind-hearted people would do. He stepped outside with a gentle posture, offering the dogs some water. He didn't raise his voice or make sudden movements. He treated them like confused pets who had wandered too far from home. For those brief moments, it looked peaceful, almost sweet. His stepdaughter, Elka Wong, later said that when they first saw the dogs, they didn't seem aggressive at all. If anything, they appeared grateful someone showed them kindness. But only moments later, the peace shattered. From inside the house, Elka suddenly heard shouting her mother's voice, then her stepfather's. What she heard was not a normal call for help. It was the kind that freezes your heart instantly. She ran toward the door, grabbed the closest object she could, an umbrella, and rushed outside without hesitation. In those few seconds, the situation had transformed completely. The same dogs Dennis had offered water were now latching onto him, pulling him to the ground. Elka didn't stop to think. She didn't wait for backup. She swung the umbrella again and again, shouting, trying desperately to free her stepfather. The dogs didn't turn toward her. They were focused entirely on Dennis. Every second mattered. Every second felt heavier than the last. Next door, a neighbor heard the commotion and ran outside. He later told reporters that he had rarely witnessed such courage. He watched as Elka and her mother put themselves between Dennis and the danger, never backing away. He said the women were incredibly brave, and that they stayed close to Dennis the entire time, even though the dogs seemed to fixate only on him.
The ladies were pretty heroic though, because they didn't seem to be too scared of the dogs and were out the entire time around the dogs. So it seemed like the dogs had something against the men.
Just as it seemed the situation couldn't get more intense, a 43-year-old man driving by saw the chaos unfolding in real time. Without thinking of his own safety, he stopped his car, jumped out, and grabbed a piece of wire he spotted nearby. He tried to help, hitting the ground near the dogs and attempting to draw their attention away. For a moment, it worked. But as soon as they redirected toward him, he had to scramble onto the roof of Elka's car to avoid being harmed. He made it up safely, but the effort left a dent and showed just how dangerous the moment had become.
He came out with some kind of wire, and he was hitting them with that too, and then the dogs went after him.
By the time deputies arrived, the tension in the air was unmistakable. The officers tried first to contain the dogs, attempting to safely separate them from the family. One deputy moved in carefully, hoping to calm the situation without force, but the dogs still lashed out. The deputy was bitten before he could fully retreat. At that point, the officers had no choice left. Protecting the people present became the priority. It was a decision that left the entire neighborhood shaken. When the chaos finally settled, the silence that followed felt heavy. Elka's mother stood in shock, saying she had never witnessed anything like it in her life. She kept repeating one thought over and over: how grateful she was that it had happened to adults and not a child. The realization of how close the situation came to becoming even more tragic left her trembling. Investigators spent the remainder of the day trying to determine where the dogs had come from. A collar was found in the grass, raising the possibility that they had an owner, but nothing was confirmed. Whether they were lost pets or strays, no one yet knows. The investigation remains open.
Cried, because she had never seen that. I was like, it's okay, Mom, because they could have bit somebody else, another kid.
Dennis McKee was taken to a downtown Houston hospital where he was expected to undergo surgery that same day. Despite everything, he remained conscious and communicative, something his family called a blessing. The deputy and the Good Samaritan who tried to help were also expected to fully recover. Neighbors later gathered in small groups along the street, talking quietly, replaying the terrifying moments. Many of them admitted that they were humbled by how brave everyone had been, from Dennis, who tried to help two animals in need, to Elka, who rushed into danger armed with nothing but an umbrella, to the passerby who leapt into action for a stranger, and to the deputy who ran toward the chaos without hesitation. What happened that morning reminded everyone how quickly life can change in an instant. One moment, it's a peaceful street. The next, it's a test of instinct, courage, and community. And in that test, everyday people showed extraordinary strength. By the end of the day, the yard was quiet again. The sun began to set over Misty Cove Drive. But for those who witnessed what happened, the memory will not fade quickly. It was a moment when fear met courage, when neighbors became protectors, and when a community realized that even in unexpected danger, compassion and bravery can rise just as quickly as fear. It is 1:30 in the morning, on the 25th of September, 2020. London Road in Norbury is quiet. The kind of stillness that makes every footstep echo. Two Metropolitan Police officers are patrolling when someone catches their eye. A lone man walking with a duffel bag, dressed head to toe in dark clothing and wearing a black surgical mask. Masks are normal that year, but burglaries have been happening in this exact area. A man wandering at this hour, with a heavy bag, gives the police enough reason to stop and check what is going on. They step out of the patrol car and approach him calmly. They explain why they stopped him, making it clear he is not under arrest, just being searched. The man listens, but he is shaking, breathing unevenly, and repeatedly trying to put his hands in his pockets, even though the officers keep warning him not to. His name, they learn, is Louis DeZoisa. He is 23. He seems jittery, nervous, and almost overwhelmed. Some of that could be explained by the small amount of cannabis he admits to carrying. Some of it might be his autism, which affects how he communicates under stress. But the officers sense there is something more behind his trembling, something he is hiding. Louis tells them he has about 3 or so grams of cannabis. It is not the confession that troubles the officers. It is his behavior. He cannot stop glancing down. He keeps reaching into his pockets even after being warned several times. After the 3rd time, the tone shifts. Officers tell him they need to cuff him while searching him, for safety. Louis quietly asks if they can do it inside the car, where people cannot see him. They insist he stays where he is.
I'm going to confess, okay, in that bag is non-medical.
One officer speaks firmly but fairly. I don't know what else you've got on you, and I think there's more to this story than you're letting on. Moments later, as they pat him down, everything changes. Something metallic, small, heavy. The officer pauses. He takes out the object. Then another. They look like ammunition.
You now told me you've got drugs on you when I thought you might have had some sort of tool on you to burgle someone's house. So now I'm going to search you stood right here, all right? Because I don't know what else you've got on you. And I think there's more to this story than you're letting on, despite having drugs on you.
The air thickens. The officer instantly tells Louis he is now under arrest for possessing what appear to be bullets. Louis does not resist. More units arrive. He is placed in the back of a van and transported to Croydon Custody Center.
How many canisters?
Yeah, canisters.
Oh. And
Right, at the moment, I'm
Right.
placing you under arrest
Okay.
for possession of what I believe to be bullets.
There, in the bright fluorescent hallway of the station, officers hand him over to custody staff. They inform Sergeant Matt Ratana, the custody sergeant on duty, that Louis was found with suspected ammunition and cannabis, and may have a firearm. At this point, nobody knows one horrifying detail. Louis has an antique revolver hidden inside a holster beneath his coat, nearly a foot long, impossible to miss under normal circumstances, yet somehow overlooked during the search. Matt Ratana, a well-liked sergeant with nearly 30 years in the force, leads standard booking procedures. He had only 2 months left until retirement, excited about life after policing, but tonight, he remains fully committed to his work. Calm, steady, ready to deal with whatever comes through those doors. Louis is escorted toward a holding cell. Officers prepare to search him again. What happens next unfolds in seconds. Louis, still handcuffed, but able to move just enough, pulls out the concealed revolver. The officers do not even have time to react. A shot is fired. It strikes Sergeant Ratana. Chaos erupts. Officers tackle Louis instantly, trying to restrain him as more shots ring out. One bullet hits the wall. Another hits Louis himself. In the narrow cell, the sound is deafening. The shouting, the panic, the scramble for control, it all happens faster than anyone can process. Both Louis and Sergeant Ratana collapse. Bleeding, officers call for paramedics, trying to save 2 lives at once. When emergency crews arrive, both men are still breathing but in critical condition. They are rushed to hospital. Sergeant Ratana does not make it. He passes away roughly 2 hours later. A man loved by his colleagues, respected by the community, known for his warmth, patience, and the way he treated everyone with dignity, even people he had arrested before. Louis survives after extensive surgery. He falls into a coma for months and wakes up with severe brain damage and partial paralysis. His condition raises a major question. Will he even be well enough to stand trial? Experts evaluate him carefully. Although he struggles to speak in full sentences, he can communicate through short written messages and understands basic questions. It is enough. A judge rules that he is fit for trial. In June 2023, Louis de Zoysa is brought to court to answer for the killing of Sergeant Ratana. The prosecution outlines a chilling theory that Louis may have been heading to his parents' home that night with a gun, possibly intending to harm his father. Their relationship had been strained for years, and police had previously been called to incidents between them. But no charges are ever brought related to harming his father, so the theory remains unproven. What is proven is everything else. Louis had legally bought the antique revolver months earlier. Using his engineering skills, he had manufactured working bullets in his garage. He told psychologists he carried the gun because he had been robbed during a drug deal and wanted protection. His defense team claims the shooting happened during an autistic meltdown, that he panicked in a confined space and lost control. The jury does not accept this. They find him guilty of murder.
Jury found you guilty of murder. The sentence for murder is set by law. It is life imprisonment. So I sentence you to life imprisonment.
During sentencing, the judge speaks plainly. Life imprisonment is mandatory for murder. For murdering a police officer in the line of duty, the starting point is even higher. After weighing Louis' medical condition against the planned nature of the act, the judge decides there is only one appropriate sentence: a whole life order. Louis de Zoysa will never be released. In the memory of Sergeant Matt Ratana, the officer who treated everyone with kindness, who was just weeks away from retirement, continues to live on in the hearts of those he touched. Inside an Arizona prison, on what should have been an ordinary morning, a single officer walked down a quiet corridor at 9:35 in the morning, doing the routine cell checks he had done countless times before. The camera footage shows him moving calmly, unaware that in seconds the hallway around him would erupt into chaos. It started the way so many dangerous moments do. Suddenly, without warning and without time to prepare. As the officer approached a cell, two inmates moved quickly toward him. Before he could react, one grabbed him while the other began striking him. The attack unfolded so fast that the officer barely had time to brace himself. The camera captured it all, a blur of motion, the officer trying to hold his balance, and another inmate nearby watching in confusion. Within 15 seconds, the officer managed to wrestle free, but the confrontation was far from over. Instead of running for help, the inmates scattered a few feet away, regrouping as the officer tried to regain control. According to Carlos Garcia, a former corrections officer and union representative, what happened next showed just how vulnerable the staff had become. In a fully staffed prison, officers rely on what is known as a man-down system, a rapid emergency response where backup arrives almost instantly. But that morning, the system broke down completely. After the officer used his spray to create distance, he was still alone. The inmates moved in again, continuing to hit and kick him as he tried to defend himself. At one point, one of them even attempted to take the officer's spray can and use it against him. Garcia later explained that the officer was lucky to be alive, and that if the attack had continued unchecked, the outcome could have been far worse. The camera showed something that stunned everyone who later viewed the footage. The inmates paused, took a short break as if exhausted, and then returned to strike again as the officer tried to climb the stairs to safety. Help had still not arrived. A minute passed, then another 30 seconds. Garcia, watching the footage from a safety perspective, said it plainly: he should have had at least 8 officers rushing in. Instead, he had none. The reason for the delay turned out to be as troubling as the attack itself. Because of staffing shortages, the officer monitoring the surveillance feed that morning had been pulled from another unit. He was not familiar with the area, and worst of all, his radio did not work. When he tried using the phone, no one answered. Completely cut off, he had to call his original unit and plead for help. That unit then relayed the message to the unit where the assault was happening. By the time officers finally reached the scene, the lone officer had already endured nearly 2 full minutes of danger without support. And this incident was not isolated. Another video, recorded on the 21st day of June 2022, at the Florence prison, painted a similar picture. The unit was supposed to house lower security individuals, yet contained inmates who had previously been rated for the highest level of supervision. Their security levels had been lowered in a process known as an override, which meant individuals requiring strict monitoring were moved into lighter security settings. Garcia said that these decisions put staff in harm's way. In the Florence clip, the video began with a quiet hallway. An officer stood to the left, and an inmate approached with a food tray. Something happened out of view, and within seconds, the tray flew across the screen. A water cooler slid by. Then the officer reappeared, on the ground, as the inmate continued to strike him repeatedly. The blows continued long after the officer stopped moving. The camera captured each moment, including the heart-dropping sight of the inmate kneeling to deliver more hits. Stains appeared on the floor from the officer's injuries, and by the time backup arrived, within 30 seconds, he needed CPR and had to be airlifted to a hospital. His recovery took time, but he survived. When reporters compared the two incidents, the patterns became impossible to ignore. Both cases highlighted the same issues: staffing shortages, communication breakdowns, and risky override decisions that placed officers and inmates in unsafe environments. The public learned something even more unsettling when reporters began asking questions. Neither case had been forwarded for prosecution until journalists pushed for answers. The Tucson incident had happened 8 months earlier, yet prosecutors said they had never received the files. Only after media inquiries did the state send the case for review. In a written statement, the Arizona Department of Corrections acknowledged that correctional officers work in a demanding and potentially hazardous environment every day. They emphasized that they are proud of their staff and continue working to address challenges. But for many watching these videos, the footage spoke louder than any statement. It showed officers doing their best with limited support, relying on instinct and endurance when the systems designed to protect them failed. For the officers involved, those minutes felt endless. For their families, the videos were painful reminders of how quickly danger can rise behind prison walls. And for the public, the incidents became a call to understand the importance of proper staffing, reliable communication equipment, and careful decisions about inmate placement. One morning in Tucson, one afternoon in Florence, 2 officers who survived frightening encounters, and a system now pushed to confront the weaknesses those cameras exposed. On the 5th day of March 2019, everything in 20-year-old Tyler Lee Grant's life shifted forever. He was a young man from Kernersville, North Carolina, living fast, making risky choices, and believing he could outrun the consequences that kept closing in on him. But that belief shattered during one unforgettable night on Interstate 40, a night that began like a movie chase and ended with a courtroom sentence that would define the next chapter of his life. It was 2 o'clock in the morning in Alamance County when a North Carolina state trooper spotted a stolen vehicle speeding close to 100 miles an hour. The officer attempted to pull the car over, but Tyler refused to stop. Instead, he reacted in a way no one expected. He opened fire, not once, but multiple times, using both an AR-style rifle and a handgun. The bullets disabled the trooper's vehicle and forced him to pull over for safety. Tyler didn't slow down. He kept driving, pushing deeper into the night, crossing into Orange County. And unbelievably, authorities say he fired at troopers again. Then his luck ran out. The vehicle got stuck, and Tyler bolted into the woods. Law enforcement launched a massive manhunt, checking back roads, wooded areas, and small towns. Officers later said they knew the situation was serious. A young man with weapons, unpredictable behavior, and nothing left to lose. But in the end, Tyler wasn't caught by helicopters or tactical teams. He was found because a regular citizen spotted him walking along a road and called 911. Officers arrived quickly, and according to them, Tyler did not seem frightened or remorseful. They described him as boastful, someone who acted like he had nothing left to hold back. He was carrying an assault-style rifle, several kinds of illegal substances, packaging materials, digital scales, and a large amount of cash. With all that added to firing at law enforcement, he received a sentence of 30 years. But life behind bars brought a new story, one that no one saw coming. Tyler entered the Orange County Jail in North Carolina while waiting for his cases to move through the system. On the night captured in the surveillance footage, the pod was unusually quiet. It was 7:29 in the evening, normally a lively hour when inmates were finishing card games, eating their last meals, or squeezing in quick conversations before lockdown. But the energy in the pod felt tense, heavy, as if everyone sensed something brewing. At a table near the television sat a man known as Mr. King. Nearby, Tyler was sitting with a couple of others. A 5th man pulled Tyler aside, speaking in a low tone, and Tyler's face shifted, cautious, alert, as if he sensed a problem coming his way. Mr. King watched the exchange from a distance, and after a moment he approached one of the men near Tyler and spoke to him sharply. Whatever was said set everything in motion. In jails, arguments rarely explode immediately. They simmer. One person comments, another responds. Pride gets involved. Suddenly someone stands up and says the words that change everything. Let's take it to the cell. It is a challenge, a test, and an unwritten rule in many correctional environments. According to the footage, that is exactly what Mr. King did. And Tyler, who had already shown in the past that he was not someone who backed down easily, followed him. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stall at the doorway. He stepped inside, shut the door, and accepted the confrontation head-on. That decision changed both of their lives. As the two went inside, other inmates moved into quiet formation. They kept an eye on the hallway, watching for officers. They prepared distractions, ways to redirect staff if they walked through. These moments, though calm on the outside, hold tension so thick you could feel it even through a security camera. The men stayed inside the cell for several minutes. No one outside could hear what was happening, only see the movement of shadows. Then the door opened. Tyler stepped out and headed toward his own cell, likely to clean up. He seemed calm, steady, maybe even unaware that anything serious had happened. But Mr. King did not walk out behind him. When officers finally came around, inmates quietly tried to steer them toward different cells, a time-tested method to avoid officers stumbling upon a fight aftermath. But within minutes, it became clear something was wrong. Mr. King had asked for his inhaler earlier, but now he needed far more help than anyone realized. He was rushed to the hospital. A few hours later, at 10:22 that night, he passed away. The autopsy revealed that he died from a combination of blunt force injuries and a sudden heart rhythm problem. His asthma and weight significantly contributed. It was unexpected, tragic, and the kind of outcome no one inside that pod had anticipated. Because the confrontation was mutual, the court charged Tyler with involuntary manslaughter, giving him a sentence of 1 year 7 months to 2 years 8 months, much lower than many similar cases. Surveillance footage likely played a major role in showing the context. State records now show that Tyler's total time behind bars adds up to 14 years, 9 months, and 25 days. His projected release date is May 2032. Tyler's story is a reminder of how fast small decisions become defining ones. A high-speed moment on a highway, a split-second choice inside a jail cell, and a lifetime shaped by choices that can never be undone. Sometimes the difference between walking away and stepping forward is the difference between freedom and a fate that lasts decades. On the 16th day of May 2023, a woman in Monroe, Ohio, woke up to a phone call that no one ever expects to get in the middle of the night. She was fast asleep when her partner, who was at work, called her sounding tense. They had cameras installed around the house, and he could see the live feed from his phone. "Who is outside the house?" he asked her. "Who is that near the car?" Still groggy, she did not understand what he meant. She got out of bed, walked through the dark house, and opened the camera app on her phone. What she saw snapped the sleep right out of her eyes. A stranger was in her driveway, right next to her car. Out on the street, neighbors started noticing orange light flickering where there should have been only darkness. Someone called 911. Officers from the Monroe Police Department arrived and saw the front of the car engulfed in flames, the fire climbing up from the engine area and washing the driveway in light and smoke. One officer hurried to the front door and found the homeowner outside, shaken and barefoot, trying to process what she was seeing. He gently guided her away from the burning vehicle. "Is there anybody else in the house we need to know about?" he asked. "No," she answered. "Just my cat." He reassured her that the fire department was already handling the car.
Okay, come tell me, what's going on? And who's all in the house? Nobody?
No, just my bird and my 2 cats.
Okay, well, they're taking care of that. Let's take care of you real quick, okay? It's just you by yourself, so.
I was dead asleep.
Right now, he needed to know what happened and who had been outside. As she tried to steady her voice, she explained what her partner had seen. Their cameras had picked up a man walking up to her car. When she said she pulled it up, she meant she opened their home surveillance footage and watched the entire thing unfold in real time.
I was dead asleep.
Yeah?
And he said, "Who's outside?" We've got cameras on the house. He said, "Who's outside?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Who's the man that put something on her car?" Because he's at work, and I guess he notified him that somebody was outside.
The video showed a man wearing light-colored sweatpants, a dark shirt, gloves, a hat, and a mask. He walked straight to the vehicle with purpose, carrying a box-shaped object. He set the box carefully on the car, then walked away and returned with another item that looked a bit like a shade or cover. On that second object, a small wire or fuse-like piece stuck out. In the recording, the man leaned in, used a lighter to ignite the wire, and then calmly walked away into the night. Within seconds, the front of the car burst into flames. Standing there in the cool air, she described it as best as she could. The officer asked if she could show them the video. She held out her phone, hands still trembling, while he watched the stranger's movements frame by frame. The fire department arrived and quickly put out the blaze, but the car itself was beyond saving. It was a total loss. The officers asked if she could forward the video to their email so investigators could keep a copy. She said she would try. In the meantime, they needed to find out where that masked man went. after he walked away from the driveway.
Can you forward that to my email address somehow? Do you know how to do that?
I'll see if I can figure. I'm not.
Okay. So your video, where did it show him walk off to? Do you know?
It looked like he just came this way.
The suspect was just last seen.
Based on the direction he seemed to disappear on camera, officers began spreading through the surrounding blocks. Some traveled on foot with flashlights. Others cruised slowly in patrol cars with their headlights low, watching for anyone who might match the clothing in the footage. Roughly 10 minutes later, only a short drive from the house, an officer spotted something that did not feel right. A vehicle was parked on the side of the road in a neighborhood cul-de-sac. It was quiet, late, and the car did not belong there. The officer approached and saw a man sitting inside. "What is going on?" the officer asked. "Not much," the man replied. He said he was just resting, that he had a long drive and needed a break.
What's going on? Hey, what's going on?
Not much, just wanted to rest up a little bit, I have a long drive.
Why are you doing it out here?
When the officer asked where he lived, he said he was from New York and had flown into the area, then rented a car and driven about 40 miles from the airport. He claimed he was here to visit a friend who lived closer to Cincinnati but worked at a job site nearby. He said he had been too tired to drive any farther and had simply turned off the main road and picked the first neighborhood he saw to stop and sleep. The story might have sounded reasonable in the middle of the day in a busy area, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, parked in front of someone else's home, just minutes away from a suspicious fire, it raised more questions than answers. The officer noticed how nervous and chatty the man seemed. When the officer explained that they were investigating a vehicle that had just been set on fire, the man's reaction came across as overly dramatic. He repeated, "How do you even set a car on fire?" as if the idea was completely foreign to him. He insisted he had no connection to it and apologized if anyone felt uncomfortable about him parking there.
The reason why I ask is because there was somebody who set a car on fire.
You set a car on fire?
Yes.
Like, what do you mean? Like, how do you set a car on fire?
They set the car on fire.
The officers asked if he had any weapons or anything dangerous in the car. He said no. When they asked if he would consent to a search of his vehicle, he agreed and confirmed on camera that they had his permission. While one officer stayed with him, another began looking through the car. In the center console, they found a mask and a torch-style lighter. There was no suitcase, no backpack, nothing that looked like luggage for someone flying in from out of state. In the back seat, they saw an impression in the upholstery that resembled the outline of a box, similar in size to the object seen on the victim's car in the surveillance footage. At the same time, a canine team had arrived at the original crime scene. The dog picked up a scent near the burned vehicle and began tracking. Following the dog's lead, officers moved through the neighborhood, turning down streets and following sidewalks until the dog grew more focused and sped up. The trail led straight to the area where the man's car was parked. As officers searched the ground around the vehicle, they found plastic bags partially hidden under a nearby pine tree. Inside were a hat, several pairs of gloves, and another mask. The hat and clothing looked very similar to what the man in the victim's video had been wearing. Back at the patrol car, they placed the man, identified as Farhan, in the back seat and read him his rights. They showed him an image taken from the surveillance footage on a phone. The shoes, the pants, the shirt, all of it looked like his outfit. He shook his head and said, "That is not me." He claimed he had simply chosen the wrong place to take a nap. He said he did not know how those items ended up near his car, and suggested that maybe someone else had dropped them there while he was asleep. Investigators then learned that the neighbor's security cameras had captured his vehicle driving into the area at around 2:25 in the morning. The victim's car had been set on fire just a few minutes earlier. His own claim that he had been there since midnight did not match what the recording showed. With the canine track, the items found near the car, the lighter and mask in the console, the box-shaped impression in the backseat, and the timeline from neighborhood cameras, officers believed they had enough evidence to charge him. He was taken to the police department, while detectives began the process of requesting search warrants for his phone and for DNA testing. Farhan was later charged with aggravated arson, breaking and entering, and possession of criminal tools. His vehicle was towed and held as evidence. Under the law, he remained innocent unless proven guilty in court. For the woman whose car was burned in her own driveway, one thing was certain. On that night when she woke up to a phone call and a frightening image on her screen, things could have ended much worse. Thanks to quick responses, working cameras, and a long trail of small details, the fire was contained, the house was spared, and the person believed to be responsible was no longer quietly parked in the shadows of her neighborhood. On September 6, 2019, a security camera in Anchorage, Alaska, recorded a scene that looked completely ordinary. A pickup truck pulled into the parking lot of a small shop. 48-year-old Brian Smith climbed out, and beside him was a woman named Valerie Kastler. They walked toward the entrance together, just two people grabbing late-night drinks. What the camera could not see was that in the back of Brian's truck, under a cover, lay the body of another woman who had lost her life the day before. And the woman walking beside him had no idea she was spending time with a man who was about to be unmasked as one of the most disturbing serial offenders Alaska had ever seen. Hours earlier, that night had started in a much more ordinary way. Brian finished his day, had a drink at home, and decided to go for a late drive through Anchorage. Behind a grocery store near Gamble Street and East 13th Avenue, he saw a woman standing in the rain. She was 52-year-old Valerie, homeless at the time and living in a tent. He pulled his truck alongside and rolled down the window. "It is raining. Do you want to ride around with me?" Cold, tired, and grateful for a dry seat, Valerie agreed. She got into the truck, not knowing she was stepping into the orbit of a man already tied to terrible things. The hours that followed felt strangely peaceful. They drove around the city, talking and listening to music. At one point, Brian even took her near the airport so they could watch planes taking off into the night sky. For Valerie, it felt like a break from the harshness of sleeping outside. For Brian, it was just another night he believed he was in control. Around 2 in the morning, he pulled into a gas station so he could use an automated teller machine and grab snacks. He stepped out and went inside, leaving Valerie alone in the truck. While she was waiting, her phone slipped from her hand and fell onto the floor. She bent down to pick it up, reached under the seat, and felt something unexpected. There were 2 phones. She picked them up, and for a brief second, she felt a chill run through her. It was the kind of instinctive warning that tells you something is off even before your mind catches up. She slipped one of the phones into her pocket, assuming it was hers, and sat back up. Ryan returned to the truck with drinks, and they continued their drive like nothing had happened. Eventually, he dropped her off and drove away. Valerie headed back to her tent, tired and ready to sleep. Only later, when she reached into her pocket, did she realize the phone she had taken was not hers at all. The lock screen was different. The contacts were unfamiliar. The layout did not match her memory. She started scrolling through it, trying to understand whose phone she had taken. That was when she saw a folder with a title that made her stop. It mentioned the word homicide and a hotel in Midtown Anchorage. Curiosity and dread pulled her deeper. She tapped into the folder and opened a video. On the screen, she saw a hotel room, a woman with long dark hair, a man's voice, calm and almost theatrical, speaking while someone was clearly being attacked. There were no movie credits, no special effects, just raw footage. The man behind the camera gave chilling commentary, talking as if he were directing a twisted film. Valerie watched in horror as she realized she was not looking at a movie. She was looking at a real crime. She kept scrolling, image after image, short clips, the same woman in distress, the same hotel room, the same voice. The folder included a title that named the hotel and the city. It felt like a confession stored in plain sight. And then another realization hit her. That voice. She had just heard it hours earlier from the driver's seat of Brian's truck. Fear closed in on her. Instead of going straight to the police, Valerie did what many people would do when they feel completely outmatched. She disappeared. For days, she stayed hidden in the woods, barely leaving her tent. Every crunch of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every engine passing in the distance made her wonder if Brian had noticed his phone was missing and was now looking for her. In those days of hiding, she replayed everything in her head. The truck, the rain, the airport, his calm manner, the way he had seemed relaxed and unbothered. And now, the images burned into her memory from that phone. The idea that he could be out there, driving around Anchorage like nothing had happened, was almost too much to process. Eventually, fear gave way to resolve. Valerie decided she could not keep this to herself. She took the phone and its memory card to the Anchorage Police Department and handed everything over. She told them what she had seen. Detectives loaded the card and began to watch. Even for seasoned officers, the contents were almost unbearable. One investigator later said it was the hardest thing he had ever seen happen to another human being. The footage showed a woman later identified as 30-year-old Kathleen Jo Henry in a hotel room. The man behind the camera spoke in a distinctive accent, part English, part Dutch, describing what he was doing as if he were performing for an invisible audience. One detective recognized that voice. It reminded him of a suspect from a previous case. The name that surfaced was Brian Stephen Smith. From there, the case moved quickly. Investigators checked hotel records and confirmed that Brian had rented a room at a Marriott in Midtown Anchorage on September 4, 2019. The time and date stamps embedded in the videos matched his stay. Around the same time, human remains with long dark hair had been found near mile 108 of the Seward Highway. Those remains were identified as Kathleen Jo Henry. Phone records placed Brian's device near that same stretch of highway. Days after the hotel footage was recorded, a still image from the card even showed Kathleen in the back of a pickup truck, matching Brian's vehicle, near the area where her remains were discovered. The SD card that Valerie had slipped into her pocket by accident turned out to be the key to everything. It connected a face, a voice, a truck, a hotel room, and a remote stretch of road into one horrifying timeline. When officers learned Brian was out of state on vacation with his wife, they arranged to meet him the moment he landed back in Alaska. He arrived thinking it was just another travel day. Instead, detectives were waiting. They escorted him from the airport to an interview room and laid out the reason he was there. At first, he talked about stolen cameras and outdoor trips. He tried to frame his missing SD card as nothing more than lost property from a break-in, but detectives knew better. They had already watched the card he claimed was gone. They had heard his voice, watched his shoes move across a hotel carpet, seen his truck and traced his phone. Bit by bit, as they showed him photos, timelines, and details, the walls closed in. No matter how many times he said he did not remember, the images on that tiny memory card told a different story. In the end, one small mistake cracked open the double life of a man who looked like an ordinary neighbor on the outside, but carried some of his darkest secrets in his own pocket. Christina Armal, age 44, and her husband Yanel Armal, age 57, lived a simple and quiet life in the town of Camari, Brazil. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable, enough to hire a cleaner, enough to keep to themselves, and enough to never imagine that something as small as a conversation overheard by the wrong person could destroy everything. It began sometime in late 2017. Christina had received a large compensation payout from an accident she'd been involved in. The amount was substantial, life-changing for the couple, but dangerously tempting for anyone with bad intentions. One day, the cleaner mentioned the payout in passing to her grandson. She didn't realize that this offhand comment would travel from one person to another until it reached two young men, Daniel Santos, age 29, and Carlos Alberto, age 25. A dangerous idea took root. If the couple had that much money, surely it must be hidden inside their home. Instead of ignoring the thought, they built an entire plan around it. They recruited 3 teenage boys, watched the couple's every move, and waited for the right moment. This wasn't a random break-in. It was a calculated plan driven by greed and fueled by the belief that this quiet middle-class couple must be sitting on a fortune. On the 7th of January 2018, their plan moved from planning to reality. It was a normal evening for Christina and Yanel. Their home was peaceful, like always, but in seconds the front door burst open, and 5 intruders rushed in. There was no warning, no time to run, no chance to call for help. The attackers overwhelmed them instantly, tying their hands, shouting demands, and ransacking the house while the terrified couple watched. Dragged into the backyard, hidden by walls and darkness, Christina and Yanel were separated from the life they knew. While one attacker kept them under guard, the others tore through the house, searching desperately for the supposed treasure they believed was there. Drawers flew open, cabinets were ripped apart, and belongings were piled on the floor. But, despite hours of searching, the money was nowhere to be found. Growing frustrated, the attackers demanded to know where the safe was. Christina and Yanel told them again and again there was none. They insisted that the compensation money was out of reach, bank-controlled, not stored inside the home. But the gang refused to believe them. The threats became physical. The fear intensified. The couple was beaten, pressured, and threatened with unimaginable harm. And still, they held on to the truth. They couldn't give what they did not have. When that didn't work, the attackers escalated their desperation. They assaulted Christina while forcing Yanel to watch, hoping it would break him. But even under unbearable distress, he had nothing to reveal. The gang believed they were being lied to, when in reality, the couple was telling the truth from the beginning. Then the cruelty crossed a line that even seasoned investigators later struggled to comprehend. The attackers injured Christina severely while she was still conscious, believing that inflicting terror in front of her husband would force him to talk. They used her suffering as a weapon, each moment designed to break the couple's will, but there was no money to confess to, and the horror only deepened. Eventually, the gang took her life in front of her husband. Her final moments were filled with fear no human should ever endure. With Christina gone, they turned their attention to Yanel. He was beaten, threatened, and injured, still being pushed for information he simply didn't have. Hours passed. When the attackers finally accepted that there was no money to find, they ended his life as well. The group dug a shallow grave in the backyard, placed the bodies inside, attempted to burn them, covered the soil, and walked away with whatever valuables they had collected from the ransacked home. 2 innocent people were gone forever, and the killers left believing they had committed the perfect crime. 2 days passed. On the 9th of January, neighbors sensed something was wrong. The couple had not been seen. Their home was silent. Concern grew until someone finally contacted the authorities. Around the same time, police received an anonymous tip that named 2 of the intruders, Daniel Santos and Carlos Alberto. Shortly after, all 5 members of the group were arrested. When detained, they were found with a shotgun, a handgun, the couple's car, and stolen belongings from the home. During questioning, the teenagers broke first, revealing details investigators struggled to process. A detective described the case as one of the most shocking and senseless acts of cruelty he had ever seen. The teenage accomplices received 3 years in juvenile detention, the maximum possible sentence under Brazilian law for minors. Details of the adult sentencing remain unclear, but one disturbing fact surfaced. A video leaked from inside the prison showed Daniel and Carlos being forced by other inmates to humiliate themselves on camera, proof of how deeply the crime disgusted even hardened offenders. None of the attackers ever showed remorse, not in court, not during questioning, not after sentencing. Christina and Yanel lived quietly, harmed no one, and never flaunted their small blessings. 2 people who had simply hoped to rebuild their lives after hardship instead faced a nightmare carried out by strangers driven purely by greed. The case may have been brief to document, but its weight is enormous. A reminder of how quickly a single careless conversation overheard by the wrong ears can lead to tragedy no one could have imagined. All that joy, all that life, and in a matter of seconds it was gone. The video that would later spread online starts almost casually. Laughter, movement, a car, a familiar neighborhood, then her husband's voice filled with anger and pride as he records himself and rants to the camera. He talks about people who do not know who they are, about how they are upset with him, and in his own words he tells them to find themselves. He says his name like a brand, like he wants to be remembered. While he is busy performing for the camera, a woman is fighting for her safety in real life. That woman is Mariah Rosanna Samuels. The morning of September 15th, 2025, begins like many others for her. The kids, the routine, the quiet few moments in her Jeep before heading off to work. The Minneapolis Police Department will later log the call at 7:50 in the morning. Multiple reports of shots fired outside a home on Russell Avenue North. Neighbors hear the sound, step to their windows, and see a scene that will stay with them forever. When officers arrive in the 1400 block of that street, they find Mariah lying partly inside her vehicle, the door open out into the road. The chaos, the sirens, the flashing lights, all of it crashes against the quiet reality that for Mariah, it is already too late. But the horror on the street is only part of the story. What investigators will soon discover is that the man responsible, the one who had just come home from prison and who should have been under serious supervision, not only hunted her down, but also spoke into a camera like he was delivering a speech. While she asked the system for help, he was building a twisted kind of spotlight for himself. To understand how they ever ended up in the same frame, you have to go back to who Mariah truly was before her name became evidence in a case file. Maria was born on January 23, 1991, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. From the time she was young, she had a light about her that people noticed. She was warm, funny, and present. She did not just pass through people's lives, she left fingerprints on their hearts. Friends and family describe her as the kind of person who made everyone feel like they mattered. The coworker who checked in, the sister who listened, the mom who showed up. At 34 years old, she had a life she was proud of. She was a devoted mother and a hard worker. She poured her energy into her job as a pet groomer at a store in Fridley. It was not just a paycheck for her. Animals genuinely responded to her. Coworkers remembered how even the most anxious or reactive dogs would calm down when Mariah held them. There was something grounding about her presence. Patient, kind, steady. Her personality made her workplace feel like more than just a job. She lifted spirits. She cracked jokes. She turned long shifts into something bearable. She was the type of person who made a place feel like home. And she did not limit her life to work and worry. Mariah loved to travel. Thailand, Mexico, Jamaica. She had been to all of them. She chased sunsets on foreign beaches, walked streets where no one knew her name, and posted photos with that big smile that made it look like she was finally living for herself. Her social media was full of laughter and landscapes, proof that she was not afraid to go out into the world and experience it fully. But even as she lived fully, something else was taking root in the background, a relationship that would eventually turn into a nightmare. In the spring of 2025, 50-year-old David Eugene Wright came into her life. He had spent many years in federal prison on drug-related charges, and, like so many men in his position, he presented himself as changed, a man who had learned his lesson, a man who was ready to do right. Whether they met through mutual friends or simple chance, by May they were officially together. At first, he seemed supportive. He drove her places, offered to help with errands, showed interest in her children. He brought gifts and flowers, played the part of the reformed partner, to a single mother carrying a lot on her shoulders. That kind of attention can feel like relief. But slowly, the attention became surveillance. He learned the opening time of her job and exactly when she arrived. He learned what time her younger son's school ended, and would drive past right then, as if to send a message. I am always here. He knew which days she went shopping. He knew which evenings she visited her sister. Her life, down to the minute, became something he tracked. Her friends noticed the shift. The woman who used to flood her social media feed with travel and joy became quieter. When they hung out, her phone would ring over and over. She would step away, answer in a low voice, then come back, forcing a smile that did not match the stress in her eyes. This was no longer a healthy relationship. It was control. It was possession. By late August, everything boiled over. On August 26, 2025, he showed up at her back door without warning. When she would not let him in, he circled the house, testing doors and windows. A friend on the phone heard the rattling, the rising panic in Mariah's voice. Eventually, he forced his way inside. He damaged her phone and struck her, turning her home into a place of terror. That friend, terrified, called emergency services while hearing the struggle in the background. Maria survived, bruised, shaken, but alive. She did what she was supposed to do. She went to the authorities. She told the truth. She listed what he had done. She got a protection order filed that same day. By August 29th, he had been officially served. The order told him to stay away from her, her children, her work, her home. On paper, she now had a barrier between herself and the man who had hurt her. For a short time, it looked like the barrier might hold. He went quiet. She blocked him on every platform she could. She started to feel slightly less afraid walking to her car, less compelled to constantly scan the street. But control is not something men like David let go of easily. Slowly, the violations began. Messages, unwanted contact, attempts to pull her back into conversation. Mariah did not hide from it. She wrote about her experience. She spoke openly about what she had been through, about how the system seemed to be moving too slowly while she lived with fear. In one of her final posts, she put into words what so many victims feel, that a piece of paper does not stop someone who has already decided they own you. Then came that morning in September. At 7:50 in the morning, as she sat in her Jeep preparing to leave for work, David arrived on a stolen bicycle, having once again studied and used her routine against her. Neighbors heard what sounded like a series of loud cracks. Within seconds, he had turned her driveway into a crime scene. When officers and paramedics arrived, they did everything they could. but there was nothing left to save. At 8:09 in the morning, Mariah Rosanna Samuels was pronounced gone. The bicycle was found later, discarded just a few blocks away, his fingerprints still on it. Within hours, law enforcement across the region knew his name, his face, his record. Federal marshals joined the search. He checked into a motel under a false name, but a manager recognized the description and called the police. 17 officers surrounded the building. When they entered his room after 3 in the morning, he was sitting on the bed, hands raised, calm. He told them he knew they would find him. His only question was chilling. Did she suffer? In the aftermath, investigators dug through his past, old protection orders from other women, past violence, a history that should have been a warning. Mariah had done everything she was supposed to do. She had reported the abuse, documented the violations, and trusted the system designed to protect people like her. It was not enough. Her family, her co-workers, her community gathered for a vigil outside her home on Russell Avenue. They held candles, spoke her name, and demanded that the world not look away. Mariah's life matters, they said. The system failed to protect her. Maria was not just a victim. She was a fighter, a mother who kept showing up, a woman who tried to save herself in the only ways the law gave her. Even in her final months, she left behind a trail of proof, of who he was, of what he did, and of how hard she tried to stay alive. Now her story stands as both a tribute and a warning, a reminder that love should never feel like surveillance, that fear is a signal, not a secret, and that when someone says they are not safe, the world cannot afford to wait. And that brings us to the end of this episode. If you found this video informative, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what we drop next. We cover stories like this almost every day, and trust me, you don't want to be left behind. If you can't wait until the next upload, there are more videos popping up on your screen in just a few seconds. Click one and keep watching. Until then, take care. I'm out.